If the original Magna Carta of 1215 only lasted a few weeks, how has this document become such an integral part of our history? Why should we celebrate Magna Carta 800 years on, if originally it was just an unsuccessful peace treaty? Even in the Middle Ages, the meaning of Magna Carta began to change. Magna Carta is often allied with principles of democracy. However, nowhere in the original Magna Carta is there any reference to democracy. The concept of democracy would not have appealed to the barons who opposed the king in 1215. Their aims were to undermine John's own power, whilst continuing to promote their interests. However, as we have seen, the reissues of Magna Carta in Henry III's reign, under the regency of William Marshal, Earl of Pembroke, became a promise of good rule rather than a peace treaty. By the time Magna Carta was issued in its definitive form in 1225, it had become a manifesto of good government. The reissues of Magna Carta were translated into French and English, along with the original Latin, and circulated around the realm. In this way, Magna Carta became a well-known medieval concept of fair kingship and good governance. In 1265, when the government was under the control of Simon de Montfort, it was decided that Magna Carta should be proclaimed twice a year, so that no one could plead ignorant of it. Edward I confirmed the 1225 Charter again in 1297, and when lawyers compiled their textbooks, it was this version of Magna Carta, as confirmed in 1297, which took pride of place as the first statute of the realm. However, as early as the 1290s, many of the clauses contained in Magna Carta were either unenforceable or becoming increasingly dated. Magna Carta also contained many clauses which were figurative rather than practical, and it did not benefit everybody. For example, Clause 39 didn't mean that everyone was entitled to a trial by jury. In the 13th century, not every man was free, and those who were eligible for a trial would be tried by their own social equals, who were not necessarily fair and impartial. Although people were aware of the Charter throughout the Middle Ages, it didn't necessarily impact upon government. But this didn't in any way inhibit the veneration in which Magna Carta was held, and contemporaries continually complained that the Charter was not being implemented, particularly during times of political crisis. Copies were often made of Magna Carta to be kept in private collections or religious houses, which further attest to the popularity of the document. By the 16th century, Magna Carta was an antique. It was occasionally referred to in parliaments, but never again reissued, copied and circulated as it had been during the reign of Henry III. Richard Pinson produced the first ever printed version of Magna Carta in 1508, and from this point onwards it was included in many legal textbooks. Using the new printing technology available to them, people became more familiar with the concept of Magna Carta. However, it was when Magna Carta was rediscovered in the 17th century that it became really the famous document we celebrate today. The idea that Magna Carta was the foundation of government and justice came from the work of Sir Edward Coke, an English lawyer, who wrote that the ancient and excellent laws of England are the birthright and the most ancient and best inheritance that the subjects of the realm have. The 17th century saw the relationship between the king and his subjects once again come under immense strain. In 1626, King Charles I wanted to raise money for his expensive policies without seeking parliamentary consent, as outlined in Clause 12 of Magna Carta. To do this, he raised a forced loan, asking his subjects to contribute towards the loan if they wished. Many were too terrified to refuse, and those who did were imprisoned. 5 knights who had been imprisoned upon their refusal to pay issued writs of habeas corpus in order to get bail. However, the judges of the King's Bench decided in favour of the king, despite the clauses in Magna Carta, allowing him to imprison the knights at his discretion. Sir Edward Coke stepped in, and he turned the medieval version of Magna Carta, which was essentially confirmation of baronial privileges, into a more modern document which declared the rights of every freeborn Englishman. In retaliation, Charles I governed without Parliament for 10 years. During the English Civil War, Magna Carta was used by Charles I's opponents as a historical precedent with which they could challenge his tyranny. In 1642, Sir Edward Coke's commentary on Magna Carta was published, and the use of the printing press once again made Magna Carta available to the population of England. In the 1640s, from the New Model Army emerged a group of pamphleteers known as the Levellers, of whom John Lilburne is probably the most famous. Lilburne had already experienced the brutality of Charles I's reign, and between 1646 and 1649 he published over 40 works which defended the rights of all freeborn Englishmen. He famously stated that I am a freeman, and the ground of my freedom I build upon the Grand Charter of England. Throughout the reign of the Stuart monarchy, Magna Carta was cited whenever the king's tyranny needed to be challenged. The issuing of the Bill of Rights in 1689 established Parliament as the supreme lawmaker in England, and in 1701 the Act of Settlement gave Parliament control over the line of succession, as well as giving the justice system legal guarantees to its freedom. Under the Stuart kings, Magna Carta, which had originally been used to restrain the Plantagenet kings, was reborn. Magna Carta was also being used across the Atlantic in the developing colonies of the New World. Those who went across to the Americas took with them founding charters based on the principles of Magna Carta. When America was fighting for independence, Magna Carta was referred to once again, and its influence can be seen in the 1776 American Declaration of Independence. Both the American Constitution of 1787 and the American Bill of Rights of 1791 were also modelled on Magna Carta. The Fifth Amendment of the American Bill of Rights states that no one should be deprived of life, liberty or property without due process of the law. This is almost word for word Clause 39 of Magna Carta. The Sixth Amendment guarantees the rights of criminal defendants, including the right to a public trial without unnecessary delay, the right to a lawyer, and the right to an impartial jury, as well as knowing who your accusers are and the nature of the charges and evidence against you. Again, this is very similar to Clause 40 of Magna Carta. Magna Carta is still incredibly well known in the United States, and in the American courtrooms you can see it cited as a legal document, and it also features in the imagery of many of America's law courts. For example, take a look at the doors on the United States Supreme Court. By the 19th century, Magna Carta had become enshrined in public consciousness, and it was used as the basis for the mid-19th century Chartist movement, which sought political reform in England. The People's Charter, written in 1838, mainly by William Lovett of the London Working Men's Association, stated the ideological basis of the Chartist movement. The People's Charter detailed the 6 key points that the Chartists believed were necessary to reform the electoral system and alleviate the suffering of the working classes. These included universal suffrage, or the right to vote, the removal of the property qualification for members of Parliament, annual parliaments, equal representation, payment of MPs, and voting by secret ballot. In 1911, the suffragettes also used the concept of Magna Carta in their newspaper, Votes for Women. The suffragettes invoked Magna Carta to support militant efforts like theirs for a good end. Magna Carta was also used on both sides of the British Empire. Imperialists believed they were bringing British justice to parts of the world that did not have access to it, and they often cited Magna Carta in this way. In contrast to this, those living under the British Empire used Magna Carta as a means for fighting for their own liberty and the right to govern themselves. In 1914, it was argued in Parliament that, in the opinion of this House, the rights of the British citizens set forth in Magna Carta, the Petition of Right, and the Habeas Corpus Act, and declared and recognised by the common law of England, should be common to the whole empire, and their inviolability should be assured in every self-governing dominion. Although it was a document of its time, dealing with specific grievances of the barons in the 13th century, some of Magna Carta's principles, as we have seen, have endured, and this is what makes Magna Carta such a special document. These values and the myth of Magna Carta have also made it very valuable. In 1941, Winston Churchill proposed to give away the Lincoln copy of Magna Carta to America in the hope that it would encourage them to support the British war effort. Some of Magna Carta's overarching themes are still present today in documents such as the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted in 1948. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights deliberately echoed many of Magna Carta's themes, for example, freedom of movement and trial by jury. It was described by Eleanor Roosevelt as the International Magna Carta for all men everywhere. The European Convention on Human Rights, which was ratified in 1950, again used Magna Carta as the touchstone for its principles. Article 5 of the European Human Rights Act states that no one shall be deprived of his liberty, save in accordance with the procedure prescribed by law. At his trial in 1964, Nelson Mandela told the court, "The Magna Carta, the Petition of Rights, and the Bill of Rights are documents which are held in veneration by Democrats throughout the world." In his defence, Mandela also argued for the necessity of ensuring the independence and impartiality of any judicial system. However, Magna Carta does have a darker side. Magna Carta has been used to promote what we would consider to be sentiments which oppose those presented by the Charter. For example, in 1981, following the Brixton riots, an anti-immigration group who called themselves Magna Carta campaigned for the Home Office to prevent further immigration, claiming that they were trying to preserve the British way of life. As we can see, Magna Carta and its legacy have been used for both good and bad. Magna Carta's influence can still be seen today in the 21st century. For example, if you go to the Supreme Court in Parliament Square, London, you'll see images of King John sealing Magna Carta. Magna Carta's influence can also be felt in 21st century legislation, such as the British Human Rights Act of 2000. Today there are only 4 surviving copies of the original 1215 Magna Carta. 2 are kept at the British Library in London, one is held by Lincoln Cathedral and the other by Salisbury Cathedral. On the 15th of June this year, these documents will have their 800th anniversary. It's amazing to think that a document agreed upon in 1215 in a meadow called Runnymede would have such an impact 800 years on. There will be celebrations up and down the country with a great focus on events taking place in Egham and Runnymede. However, today if you go to the site where Magna Carta was sealed in 1215, you will only see 2 memorials which hint at the significance of this meadow. The first is the Magna Carta Memorial commissioned by the American Bar Association. The second is the John F. Kennedy Memorial, designed by Geoffrey Jellicoe. However, on the 15th of June 2015, a new memorial, designed by the artist Hugh Locke, will also be unveiled to commemorate Magna Carta's 800-year history. Magna Carta is a document which has been reinterpreted by each generation. What Magna Carta means to us today is very different to what it meant to people in 1215, during the 1640s, and even in the 20th century. So what will Magna Carta mean to people in another 100 years, when we will undoubtedly be celebrating its 900th year anniversary?